Welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Raf and Solène. Where in the world is everyone coming from?
Australia, Melbourne,
Dubai, UAE,
New Mexico, and the United States. Today we are going to be talking about BPD, eating disorders, and body image. If this or other BPD-related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so that you do not miss anything. We're going to dive right in with our first question to set the stage. Were you diagnosed with both BPD and an eating disorder? Yes, no, tell us more.
Yeah, no, I was diagnosed with BPD like 4 or so years ago. Never an official diagnosis for an eating disorder, but weirdly enough, like going through, let's call it the BPD journey, and kind of like revisiting specific parts of my life, either my teenage years or just sort of like, I don't know, pivotal plot points in my life. I had slowly noticed how disordered some of like my behavior was around my body and exercise and eating and like goals that were put into my mind from a really young age, like how disordered and unhealthy they were. And that's only something I kind of started realizing after I got the BPD diagnosis. I don't know if it was the lack of self-reflection or just then realizing, oh, there were some behaviors that weren't healthy. But yeah, it was kind of a big thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense. It sounds like you're saying that you grew up in an environment where this was kind of modeled maybe for you. And like, if that's what you're used to, if other people behave that way, like, why would you think that there's something wrong, right? It's not until later when you start working on yourself and gaining some self-awareness where you're like, maybe this is not actually the thing to be doing.
Besides the fact that I was born in the 90s and 90s food culture and all that was like messed up, all of it was basically from my parents. And like, even with that said, accidentally my parents, they were only trying to help in the way that they thought helping was, which in hindsight, well, at the time I was like, oh yeah, we're getting healthy. Looking back at it, it was like a child being put on diets consistently and then going to naturopaths and getting like weighed and having their body fat percentage checked and compared every single week and having all these like things for like all this like pressure put onto me, on top of also getting picked on quite heavily as a child. And with that being my only real window into like how society treats people who are either overweight, underweight, whatever weight, that was normal. And I was like, oh yeah, I grew up and like this is all like how normal people should think. And then looking back at it, I was just like, holy crap, that was messed up. I should probably not think I look disgusting by default. Turns out you should probably love yourself or like at least be okay with yourself. Yeah, when you just grow up in that, it just becomes your normal. You become the frog in the boiling hot pot of water.
thinking it's not that hot. Everybody else seems fine in this water.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, everything you said is like resonating so much, like for me. Same as you, like I was diagnosed with BPD. Actually, last week was my 3-year anniversary of my diagnosis. So woohoo. But I've never been diagnosed officially with an eating disorder. But I've always exhibited behaviors that would qualify as disordered eating, particularly binge eating. So where you're like overeating and you're not at all realizing that you're even eating, and it's like your conscious mind is gone somewhere else. And a lot of that comes back to what you were referring to in terms of childhood experiences. So I was heavily bullied for my weight. I was the heaviest girl in the class, and so, you know, I got that nickname, which is Solène la baleine. Baleine in French is a whale, and they had a song as well. So Solène la baleine, Solène la baleine. So when this follows you around like the whole time, obviously it's going to impact, you know, your self-esteem and the way that you see yourself. So I always saw myself as absolutely huge, gigantic, and I still have this very distorted image of my body. And the other part was the family dynamic. Definitely, like, I inherited some of the modeled behaviors, but also in my family, like I was, you know, certain comments were being made, like say, for example, everyone is having all these crisps, you know, like kind of aperitif style, you know, very French. We're all having crisps and nuts and stuff, and then everybody's enjoying it, and then turn to Solène and, yeah, you should stop eating those. It's not good for what you have. Oh, it's not good for what you have. What do I have? I'm 10 years old. For me, I'm like, what is it that I have, right? What is it that me singled out I'm not supposed to, you know, eat? And yeah, and I would see like one of my parents, you know, like punish themselves, like meaning they would eat like a lot and then the next day say, oh, I can't eat, I can't have breakfast, I can't have lunch because, you know, I ate so much. So, and because I was told repeatedly, like, oh, you look so much like your dad. And then I saw my dad do this and I knew my dad was overweight. So there was this weird then dynamic that was created. I think subconsciously I wanted to look more like him. Because then maybe, you know, I would be accepted or feel accepted in my family. And yeah, what happened was a vicious cycle started where I would overeat because I'm being bullied and I'm suffering emotionally and I'm in pain, and then I would gain weight and therefore I would be bullied more, and then I would overeat as a coping mechanism, and then and that was, you know, what really like hurt me long term, and that I found really hard to break away from, because eating became part of my coping strategies, coping with some of the BPD symptoms, and I'm sure we'll come on to that through eating.
It's so interesting because my experience is so different from either of those, because I don't remember being brought up around diet culture all that much until I was a teenager. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder in 2004 when I was 15, and that was sort of the same time I was diagnosed with BPD. It was actually in an eating disorder treatment center that somebody first suggested that BPD was what I have. So I was diagnosed with eating disorder not otherwise specified because I kind of oscillated between different behaviors: overeating, undereating, binging, purging, you know, having oddly restrictive food rules. And if I try to think about where it came from, I think I had a lot of issues when I started going through puberty, because I really did not like that my body was changing outside of my control. I didn't like turning into a woman. I've been pretty large chested since I was relatively young, and that got me some attention from boys that was not like the most wanted. And so I started having a lot of body image issues, and I learned about eating disorders in health class. And I realized that their intention was to educate, but the examples that they showed were kind of really extreme, like people who were super emaciated, who ended up in the hospital. And in my like teenage kid mind, I was like, I could do that. I just will do it better than them. I won't get sick. I'll be able to keep it under control. And boy, was that a lie, because it was such a slippery slope. I was not able to control it. It definitely controlled me. But, you know, at the time, it didn't occur to me that I had no concept of anything like addiction. I had no idea what it would feel like to have a behavior that you were doing but didn't feel like was in your control at all. I had no concept of that. I thought people who were engaging in that behavior were consciously, intentionally doing it, and so they could stop if they wanted to.
Ah, jeez.
And so, yeah, then when it got out of my control, that was a rude awakening. So, what specifically did you struggle with at the worst point?
I don't know if there was any specific worst point, but yeah, the biggest struggle was just trying to disconnect my identity and my self-worth from my weight and what I was putting into it. And it's something I've only really kind of started to get a bit more under control of, like maybe let's say the last 2 years or so, year and a half. I've had to like aggressively change my relationship with food and just being like, it is fuel. that's it. There's no moral, there's no ethical, there's no other value to it besides fuel. But yeah, that struggle kind of still goes on even today. If I'm not doing the best, like gym wise or eating wise, I will legitimately just feel worse about myself. And what's kind of worse is when I like look at myself in the mirror or whatever it is, the thing that I see will look worse, even though scientifically, physically, all that, it actually can't look any different because it's been like a week or something like that. And yeah, I think that's been the biggest struggle for me, just like finding a way to disconnect like how I've been eating, how I've been exercising, all that sort of stuff to my own self-worth and how that would affect how quite literally and mentally, physically see myself.
Yeah, still difficult for me as well. So I think this episode feels quite raw
Yeah.
because of that. When I was in my early 20s, I was living in Norway, and we were like having like this party lifestyle and eating a whole bunch of stuff and drinking, and it was all wonderful until one day I found this scale with my friends in the basement. We hadn't weighed ourselves in ages, and we were like, let's just weigh ourselves together, like this thing. And I will remember the number of that on that scale forever and ever. Like, it was just so much heavier than I was a few months back, and I was just like, this is it. I'm losing weight at all costs, any cost. I did all sorts of like random diets. I did the Special K diet at the time. If you were lucky enough to live in these days where they were advertising Special K, which is a cereal brand, as like, if you have Special K for breakfast and dinner, then you will be so slim and so healthy. Which please don't do that. Never do that. This is not advice at all. This is the opposite. But they actually advertise that, Anyway, eventually, through like lots of different not healthy ways, I ended up losing a lot of weight over the next couple of years, and that completely changed my appearance, but it didn't change like my connection to my body, the way that I viewed my body and my self-image and all of that came with it. Like, I still saw myself as like this whale, like they used to call me as a kid, right? I still saw myself as huge, and I went towards behaviors that, where I look back now, highly problematic, which I carried out for a long time. Like Raf, you were just saying, like for me, it's like at least a decade of struggles around this. So those extremes, weighing myself every single day, and completely like my mood, my self-image, my worth depending on the number. And then the shame spiral. Like that voice, when you've had the behavior, like binge eating, not even like completely losing track of what's happened or that sensation, or restricting. And then really that voice that says, how could you do this? Like, I hate you. Like, I can't believe, like, I hate myself. I can't believe that I'm so weak that I can't even eat properly. And like, sorry, can we swear? What the fuck is wrong with me? And that's very isolating, because also then it's like, if the next day that I'm not eating, right? So I can't go out. So if I have plans, I need to cancel my plans or things like that. So it affects then every area of your life. You think you're doing something to be fit and healthy, but actually it's like completely the opposite. It's like miles away from that. And somehow you're obsessing over like that one thing. And there are food that are bad and food that are good. And it's like, everything is so obsessive, and it's all about control. For me, it was all about trying to control one area of my life when everything felt like it's out of control.
I can really relate to the control piece. And I sometimes wonder how much of this is like an integral part of like food issues. But for me, I think a lot of it stemmed from like not being able to control my body or my emotions. And so having something that I felt like I could control, even if it was highly dysfunctional, felt safe. And at my worst, it was when I was a teenager, and I was just engaging in bulimic behavior like most of the time. And I was actually on a trip to Germany. I remember calling my parents and like I was in tears. I was like, I can't control this anymore. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they had sort of recognized the signs because somebody else in my family, extended family, had similar issues when they were much younger. So they got me into treatment right away, which I'm really grateful for. And I don't have an eating disorder at all anymore. Completely recovered from that. But the inner critic, that voice that kind of fueled a lot of the behavior, is definitely still there. Like the body image issues that kind of started me down that path of like, you bleep, looking in the mirror and calling myself all these names and nitpicking every tiny little thing. That voice is still there. It's not really connected to food anymore, specifically. Like I don't feel like I have to go do the food things, but yeah, she's pretty mean. So how does BPD intersect with your disordered eating challenges or body image issues?
I think a big part of it is, well, for me anyways, the identity disturbance. When, like I mentioned before, like I was picked on pretty heavily in primary school. Was like an overweight kid, and like they called me like boobs or man boobs or something in like primary school, and like relentlessly picked on me at all times. And I remember like only a few memories of my childhood. One of them was like on the way home in my car with my mum, just crying, upset, just because it'd be random kids I didn't even know, and like yeah, it was awful. I'm assuming that's kind of where it started, or one of the points where it started, because so early on, an unhealthy amount of energy was put into manipulating the way I looked, going to the gym, obsessing about body fat percentages. Like I was like 15 years old, and one of my goals was to get to a 6% body fat, which is like almost bodybuilder type shit. I think that the punitiveness around it and like the issues with self-worth around that too kind of created this perfect storm where whatever happened on the outside as far as like the negative, like getting bullied or getting put on all these diets as a kid or getting consistently weighed and all that sort of stuff, it kind of just created the perfect thing for me to just be able to be forced to just disconnect my mental self from my physical self. Because after a while, I probably just became too much to bear. And that's something that still goes on today. Like I tell people, like, I don't really know what I look like. And they don't really understand it. And I'm like, I don't know what I look like. Like I don't know how to explain it to you. But when people say, oh, like you're really fit or like, you're massive, you go to the gym, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yes. Like, I don't know. Like, and I see myself in the mirror. And if a little part of me is like obscured or slightly baggy clothes or even in a photo, my brain immediately fills the rest of the gaps in that image with just like obese me.
I'm really glad that you brought up that identity part. I was going to say, emotional instability, but, you talking about identity made me remember that was something that other people who didn't have BPD would also talk about in treatment, that like they had made their eating disorder their identity and they wouldn't know who they were without it, which I thought was really interesting. But one of the things that I remember, the treatment providers would talk about is, other things that they could focus on. And it, when prompted, most people did have other hobbies or things that they felt identified them. It was still scary to get rid of some of that disordered eating, but they had other things that defined who they were if they really sat and thought about it. But I think this is where there's that nuance, right? Like when you have BPD, there's that extra element of like, but there is nothing else that defines me. Like this is, because we tend to be so all or nothing, it's like, but this is the thing. I put my identity completely into my weight. Like I literally have no other things. Like you can ask me all you want, but like, I don't know, the fact that I love cats, I don't feel like that's an integral part of my identity in the same way. Like and then definitely I've used eating disordered behavior as an emotion regulation tool. If I was upset about something, go engage in that behavior. It's a great distraction. It's not really great, but like, in the moment at the time I believed that it was a distraction. I mean, and it did function that way. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say some of these things without glorifying them, inadvertently.
It's an ineffective coping strategy. That's how I try to say it. Because you're coping with something but it's ineffective long term. Like short term, it's like works straight.
That's the reality of a lot of these behaviors, is that in the short term, they kind of relieve the stress or whatever is going on, but you end up with severe long-term consequences. You're sacrificing your future for your present moment. And that's the part that is so damaging about it. So because of the emotional instability related to BPD, I've had a history of being very vindictive, because I always felt like other people needed to understand my pain in order for us to move forwards. But through my eating disorder, strangely, that behavior would continue, but in ways that actually weren't really truly vindictive, because people didn't know about it. And what I mean is, like, if I got into it with somebody, I might go privately engage in eating disorder behavior as revenge. Like, I'm going to do this to myself and, you can suck it. But, like, they didn't actually know I was doing it. So, and the only person I was really hurting was myself. And now I look back and I'm like, what? But in the moment, it made total sense to me. I was like, I'm going to do this and that'll show you.
I don't know what I look like. I feel like, Raf, I want to get that on a t-shirt. Like, I would wear that proudly. Oddly.
I get told that a lot. I would get that on a t-shirt.
It just makes so much sense to me. Like, people keep saying, oh, you're so slim, you're so fit. I'm like, what? Have you seen my belly? Have you seen this? Have you seen that?
Right.
It's like that completely distorted image, like that body dysmorphia that is there. And I think is linked also to the identity disturbance, and Xannie, same with the emotion regulation, particularly for me with sadness and anxiety, especially anxiety. If I'm nervous, stress eating. In addition to that, the other couple of symptoms that I've noticed my disordered eating habits are linked to with BPD, one is emptiness. So I just want to fill the void. I just feel nothing. I just need to fill that gap in me. And the other one is interpersonal relationships. Like if I'm feeling like I'm having a conflict or something, I don't have anyone to talk to. There's always chocolate. Chocolate was my best friend growing up. Like I would come home after school and I would go and eat a whole bunch of cookies or chocolate. There was nobody at home, so nobody will know. And that, therefore, like if I feel distraught about some interpersonal interaction, I turn to sweet, soothing food.
What was the first step you took towards recovery, and how long did it take before you felt fully committed to getting better?
It's so hard because I doesn't feel recovered. And that's the trickiest part. But I know that I am doing things to try and help that out. But like the first steps were just trying to brute force a mindset change into myself. And that's basically just telling myself that like food is fuel and I need it to live. Like this is the thing. If I don't have this thing, my body does not have the fuel to function and do all the other things that I want.
What, do you have an aha moment?
I wouldn't be able to pinpoint one specifically. I would just kind of remember like topics that are kind of based around like, you know, diet culture or intermittent fasting or whatever bullshit like that came up. I kind of just remember when it started feeling physically uncomfortable, where hearing that sort of stuff kind of like put this dread into me somehow.
Do you feel like you're fully committed to recovery now?
I think absolutely yes. It was only through looking back that I was like, holy crap, this is actually been a thing that's really affected me and still affects me now. And like, it's kind of now something I really want to deal with. Because yeah, I kind of think it's had a much bigger effect than I think it has.
Yeah, for me, BPD recovery came first, and it's only through the BPD diagnosis and working with my therapist where I realized that disordered eating was a coping strategy that I was using to cope with the symptoms of my BPD. Because until then, I was in complete denial that I had any eating issues, because I was like, well, no one sees it. I'm not underweight. I'm not overweight, so therefore I can't possibly have a problem. And I was very defensive about it until really that moment where, you know, we listed all of these strategies that I was using to cope with some of my symptoms and challenges. And eating came up. And I was like, whoa. And then again, it was one that stayed there on the list of strategies for a while and kept coming up, like when emotions were high and things like that. So little steps. It was not really one aha moment. It was little steps like, okay, I'm not going to weigh myself every day anymore. I'm going to weigh myself every couple of days. It's really fascinating when I heard the brute force version. For me, it was the opposite. It was like using loving kindness, self-compassion, to really think like, it's okay if sometimes I overeat and sometimes I eat a little bit less, let's release some of that control and some of that pressure. Like, let's connect with my body and try to understand what my body's trying to tell me, the cues so a lot of mindfulness and a lot of gentle connection. One of the moments when I realized, oh, okay, was my sister actually said that she'd seen some video online and she was like, okay, let's do this with you and see, just see, be curious, see. I was like, okay, sure. She's like, take my laptop charger, put it in a circle on the floor around you at the size that you think your hips are, but on the floor, not around your hips, on the floor. And I put it on the floor and I made this circle. And then she was like, okay, now pick it up and bring it to your hips. The size that I made the laptop charger was at least twice. It was slightly over twice the size of my hips. And that was like a big moment for me because I was like, oh, oh.
It's like the maths isn't mathing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think the closest aha moment I had, because I kind of, like I said, I gave myself an eating disorder kind of on purpose, right? So I always kind of knew from the beginning that this was not behavior that people should be doing on purpose. I just thought it was going to be a cheat way to achieve my goals and that I was going to stay on top of it. And I think for me, really the big change was when I called my parents and admitted to them what I was doing, because that was just kind of when I came out with it. And in terms of feeling fully committed to recovery, I don't think I actually was fully committed until I started actually recovering. Because it was kind of like I just had to do it because there weren't any other options. It was consuming my life to the point that when I was a senior in high school, I had to leave school for a few months to be a part of a partial hospitalization program. Like, I couldn't just keep living my life. And I was terrified of recovery. I was not fully committed to it at all. I went into treatment at 15. I think I started feeling fully committed to recovery in my early 20s. So like 7 years probably, because I was so afraid of losing that control. I really believed the illusion that engaging in this behavior kept me in control of myself. And it wasn't until I started to actually give up some of that control and realize that it's not actually that scary that I could be committed to the long-term process. And I think that's an important part of recovery from a lot of things in general, is that, like with BPD, I think a lot of things were the same. I didn't actually think a lot of things would work, but I was just so effing miserable that I was willing to give anything a try, even a half-hearted try. Yeah, for me, I didn't feel committed until after I started seeing the results of change.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only feel committed since very recently. Now I'm 100% committed because I'm like, there's other things I want to focus on more than food.
Yay! I think it's important to that we give ourselves grace and compassion for this, because people on the outside will often say things like, why can't you just do things differently? Like, why is it so difficult? And you got to realize that it's kind of like the devil, right? Your disordered behavior. That's what you're comfortable with. You're basically asking somebody to take a leap of faith to do something that does not feel natural to them. Of course there is going to be some resistance there. And the longer you've engaged in dysfunctional behavior, the more that becomes your normal. right, the harder it is to let that go. And so I definitely internalize some of the things that people said, like, why can't you just do this differently? Why can't you just, allowing that to feed the voice, right? And it's just important to recognize that changing into something you've never been is going to be scary and hard for anyone, whether it's eating disordered behavior or anything else. Where do you feel like you are on your eating disorder body image recovery journey now, and what are some of the most effective strategies that you have used so far to move forwards?
I feel like I'm at the fairly beginning of my recovery journey. I've spent probably a couple of decades in denial. So the first step for me was accepting, realizing that this is impacting so many different areas of your life, and what are the long-term goals, and so really facing it. Self-compassion, like especially after engaging in a disordered eating behavior. I'm working so much on that voice in that moment and what that voice says, and changing it from some of the really negative thoughts that I may have or have had naturally before, to much more like, you're human, it happens, it's a one-off, like it's okay, it's not the end of the world, and really like breathing, loving kindness, like just practicing all of that has been super, super helpful. And be more mindful when I'm eating slower, like trying to slow down the pace, because I eat very, very, very fast. And the final thing is following different accounts. I realized that my feed, and therefore all of the ads that I was getting, and all of the "you might like this video," it was all about before and after weight pics. So following like body positivity accounts, eating disorder recovery accounts, just to like change my feed, so that even if I am still getting some of these ads, because diet culture is all over, baby. In between, I'm getting all of these conflicting messages that my brain is like, oh, but look at this amazing woman. She looks so gorgeous. And she's talking about body positivity and wearing underwear on the internet. I love it. So yeah, that's been super, super helpful. And just committing to that change, it's going to be a long-term thing. Like, this is the long-term. This is, this is Solène, future Solène, and envisioning like, what am I doing today and how does that impact future me, because turns out I think I am going to live beyond 35 years. So surprise, surprise.
When I was a teenager, I thought I was going to be dead before I turned 25. So, you're...
Yeah.
35 was in my head, and I am 35 now, so it's like a big milestone, like I'm turning 36 in August. I'm like, damn.
Yeah, we did it.
This might be happening.
This life thing might keep on going.
I might actually re-up my subscription. I'm not going to cancel my subscription after all. I've seen those memes, but there's
Season 30 got pretty good.
We need to have that as a reel. Come on, this is gorgeous. This is so good.
It's kind of, it is nice, but it is dark.
A little bit of dark humor for all of you.
Yeah, I think like what Solène said, changing your environment, or changing my environment specifically, both digital environment and analog environment. I made this decision a long time ago to like change my feed to have a lot of body positivity creators on there, people who would, still talk about gym and exercise and all that sort of stuff, but having it not framed in a, get bigger, get better, do all that sort of stuff, but like as a way to kind of like, soothe your nervous system, or just improve your mobility, or like, even just lift heavier, but not to have your own value put into that. Like, changing your digital environment was definitely one of the bigger things. That's what kind of started the internal change for me.
My approach to a lot of things has ended up being very behavior focused, because I've found that trying to change how I think first is like trying to push a 1,000-pound rock straight over my head. It's so hard to change my thoughts first. So I really focused first and foremost on changing my behaviors and just trying to tolerate the distress that came up. So like eating a normal sized meal and not purging afterwards, and just trying to sit with that for as long as possible and trying to go as many meals in a row as I could without purging. And for me, I found that the more I could physically engage in healthier behaviors, the thoughts started to go away, because the thoughts were very much reinforced by the behavior. You know, it was like, because the thoughts were like the motivator, right? I would think like, I need to engage in this, or I'd have an urge. And if I acted on the urge, then the thoughts would just keep coming. That was kind of how my disorder had developed in the first place, was, you know, I was trying this behavior that I thought I was in control of. And so when I stopped the behavior, lo and behold, the eating disorder related thoughts did eventually fade. And it was really hard. It's not like I just changed things overnight, right? It's small incremental changes. Now, like I said, I don't have an eating disorder at all anymore. When I was 20, I remember having a conversation. I've had this conversation many times with people when I was 20, but I was like, there will never be a day that I look at food and I don't just see numbers. That will never, ever happen. Ever. My whole life, I'm just going to be doomed to seeing calories every time I look at food. I have to look it up now. If I care, I don't most of the time, because it's not something that matters that much to me. But I have to look up nutrition facts if I want to know them, because I can't remember them anymore. And that is wild to me. I really, truly thought I was never going to get to a point where I wouldn't have those thoughts. And I don't. I was in the hospital with a friend of mine who has an eating disorder, and the nurse said to me, well, people don't really get over this. And I just want to tell you, I'm living proof that it is possible. Like, you can completely get rid of all of it, the behaviors and the thoughts. Because I was so mad when she said that.
And it's baby steps, right?
Yeah, it's baby steps.
And it's baby steps. That's the thing, I think, because often we think, oh, it's like all or nothing. Again, like back to some of the BPD stuff, right? We think, oh, I need to be perfect in the way that, I'm not overthinking about food. I'm doing all this. I'm still healthy, but I'm not disordered in my eating. It's like this image of like this perfect relationship with food. But what I'm hearing from what you're saying, which is amazing, and it's like so inspiring for me, I'm just thinking, yes, it's like baby steps, and then eventually it becomes your new like habit of like, you're not even thinking as much about these things, and you're like, oh wow, and it comes such a long way. Yeah.
Thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so that you do not miss anything. Friday, we'll be back to talk about how we handle social situations with food, so be back for that. Next Wednesday, we'll be back with a brand new topic, so we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.